Hey, what's up guys, welcome to my spoiler-free review of Jessica Jones Season 2. So for those of you who don't know, this is the first Marvel Netflix series to be directed by an all-female team of directors. This is really impressive what these women have accomplished here in Season 2. So this was definitely one of my more anticipated Marvel Netflix shows that's supposed to be releasing this year. And like the first season of Jessica Jones, this has definitely lived up to the hype, but in a way that you really wouldn't expect it to. Season 2 follows Jessica Jones' story post-Defenders in Season 1 and explores Jessica's haunting past and origin story. The season was different from the first season, and that might throw people off, but if you really stick with it all the way to the end of the season, then I think you'll really experience something groundbreaking and something new that we really don't see in superhero shows that much anymore. The first thing that really stood out to me was just the overall tone of this season. You know, it's much more darker, it's more mature, more somber, and just more emotional. And part of that is because of Kristen Ritter's performance as Jessica Jones. This is by far the best performance I've seen from her since Season 1. It's just the delivery of all the lines and all of the actions that she took, or just the way she performed was just absolutely amazing. It still blows me away that Marvel Netflix can cast such amazing actors. Additionally, all of the other performances were also really breathtaking, even the new characters. And they've introduced a lot of new characters this season, you know, probably a good like 9-10 new characters. That's one of the things I really like about the whole story world of Jessica Jones, is that no matter what character they bring in and no matter how big or small their role is towards the story, they're all just such an absolute delight to watch on screen. The next aspect that really stood out to me was the writing and narrative. These two always go hand in hand, and a darker tone brings an opportunity to write more mature storytelling in a much more layered story. And Jessica Jones Season 2 really took advantage of that. The writing is absolutely phenomenal. You know, it feels much more organic than the first season did. Even though the season is really dialogue heavy and exposition heavy like the first season, but it's still interesting enough to the point where we actually care what happens. And all of this dialogue and exposition might throw off a lot of fans, but for people who stuck with the whole first season and who really like these characters, I think they're really going to enjoy just the overall substance that's beneath all of this exposition. The story is much more complex, and it really gets you thinking about every action that these characters take. And I think that was a really big selling point, just because how character driven this series has become. And the first season really focused more on Jessica, and then it focused on a little bit of the other characters, but this season really branches out and it gives you a good balance between Jessica's story and then Jerry Hogarth's story, then a few other characters' stories. And that's all thanks to the exceptional writing and narrative. The next point, which is something that I don't think everyone is going to agree with, is the main villain. The main villain isn't another kind of Kilgrave type of character, but again, at the same time, it kind of is at some level. I don't really want to dive too much in detail there because it would be going to spoiler territory, but if you watch the show all the way to the end, you'll really understand this villain's motives and their actions. So just stick with the show is what I'm trying to say. But after all of this is where the show kind of takes a bit of a dive. The one major factor that may absolutely bother a lot of people is this extremely slow burned pacing. From my perspective, I was already heavily invested with these characters and overall story to the point where I could kind of overlook the slow pacing. But for somebody who really isn't, that was the one thing that they didn't like from the first season, is probably going to be annoyed by that again in this season, but on a much more extreme scale. There was times, even though I overlooked most of the pacing, there were still times that I found myself trying to piece together scenes that could push the story forward. But those scenes that I conceptualized never really happened, and they kind of went in a different direction. And that kind of slowed down the whole first half of this season. Don't get me wrong, you know, there's still a lot of interesting characters that they introduced and a lot of really good writing storytelling there, but just the overall pacing was just really slow. Even though I binged most of this in one day, it still felt like a lot longer than a good like 10 or 12 hours that I binged for that day. The second half of the show really picks up momentum really quickly around episode I think episode 7 or 8 is when it really picks up, and then just goes straight from there. It keeps a balanced pace from there on. So that's when I think the story gets really more interesting, and you really just stick with the show. So if you kind of just still pay attention to the first half, then you'll be rewarded with the second half. The one thing that I did like that did come out of the slow pacing is just how unpredictable this season was. Because the first season, you could kind of predict what was going to happen a little bit too easily at times. But with season 2, it's a lot more complex. And even though I was like, oh yeah, this might happen, or this character might do that, they went a completely different direction from what I was thinking. And I thought a lot about this. And no matter how much I tried to like predict different scenarios of how the story would progress, they kept kind of going in a different direction in which I didn't even think of. And that's good storytelling right there. The other factor that might bother a lot of fans is the main villain. I touched on this a little bit earlier that I liked about it, but there's some things that I think fans aren't going to like about it. As I said earlier, this is at the same time kind of like a Kilgrave type of villain, but at the same time it's not a Kilgrave type of villain. It's a really mixed bag that this character is kind of built from. And it's definitely, I'd say, the most risky villain that Marvel in general has introduced to the big screen. But at the same time, it's also a much more eye-opening villain, because it really gets you thinking about how many layers a villain can actually have, and the reason why we should care for these villains. They introduced a concept that we don't see much anymore in television and even in movies. So it was a nice refresher. Just when you watch the show and you really pay attention to the character, you'll understand what I'm trying to say. At the end of the day, despite its jarring pacing and risky villain, Jessica Jones Season 2 is a solid second season and continues Jessica Jones' story and leaves viewers with a few strong underlying messages and room to further expand Jessica Jones' story for future seasons. But that's all I've got for you guys. Just my overall spoiler-free review of Jessica Jones Season 2. Overall, I give Jessica Jones Season 2 an 8.5 out of 10. Feel free to smack the like button if you enjoyed the video, as it's always appreciated. And let me know what you guys think about this season. Have you seen it? What do you think about it? Do you hate it? Do you like it? Do you have mixed feelings? I think a lot of people are going to have mixed feelings about the season just because of the extreme shift in the overall tone that it's taken compared to season 1. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And also, if you want to see more reviews like this and more superhero content, then hit subscribe to see more. I'll see you guys next time.